Let's get to Biden and Trump agreeing to participate in two, not one, but two presidential debates.
The first debate will be held in the battleground state of Georgia, but without an audience. And the other will be a primetime face-off held in a news studio. But the commission's 2020 debates drew criticism from all sides for being especially chaotic and contentious.
Will you shut up, man?
Contentious as in Trump did almost execute Biden. Like, Trump did do an attempted assassination on Joe Biden. Something that we forget about. He literally had COVID. He was sick. And he went up on that stage against an 800-year-old corpse, just like coughing in his direction and being like, hey, shake my hand. Come on. I mean, I'm exaggerating. I don't think he did that, but.
Listen, who is on your list, Joe? Who's on your list?
Right. Gentlemen, I think
this is so
unprecedented.
Ed, I really didn't think this was going to happen. So what was it that brought both candidates together to say, yeah, we're on board?
Shake my hand, Brandon. If you're a real man, Joe Biden, you would shake my hand. ABC will allow simulcast. CNN won't. Bad form, CNN. Very bad form. ABC will share the debate with other broadcast and streaming news networks. The simulcast, CNN has said only that its debate will air on its own platforms. Classic. I saw that this was going on, and I had a statement about it. I said, I, for one, am excited to watch two 80-year-old men yap about a bunch of issues they almost completely align on with respect to policy while acting as though they're miles apart from one another. Aaron Rupar, liberalism's greatest soldier, actually hit me with a quote tweet and hit me where it hurts. He said, Trump supports stripping bodily autonomy from women. Biden does not. Trump supports taking healthcare away from tens of millions of people. Biden does not. Trump wants to round up migrants and put them in detention camps. Biden does not. Excuse me. That part's a little weird. Trump supports executing drug dealers. Biden does not. Trump wants to withdraw from NATO and form an alliance with Russia. Biden does not. I could go on. Is annoying ideology? If so, Rupar got that in spades. Some of the stuff that he's mentioning is just not even fair to bring up in this conversation, considering that it's ironic because there are aspects of the Biden administration that is demonstrably better. Pango lives is correct. There are aspects of the Biden administration that is demonstrably better. It's ironic that he didn't mention them, though. Like, for example, not eviscerating federal agencies and actually utilizing them, which Biden has done. But these guys are so permanently warped in posturing against Trump brain. The problem with liberalism is that it is inherently reactionary. Maybe not as bad as like the actual Republican attitude, but overall, liberalism is also inherently reactionary as an ideology, which is precisely the reason why they always talk about the boundaries of what they are not, what they are up against. But slowly but surely, the things that you are saying that you should be voting for Biden for get smaller and smaller and smaller in that time frame. He didn't even mention any of the things that Biden has done, things that I will readily admit and routinely talk about. Okay. In my tweet, I singled out immigration, Israel, Palestine, and tariffs. Those are the three key issues that Biden is 100% aligned with Trump on. And then I also mentioned one aspect that he's not aligned with Trump on, which is his most important key difference between him and Trump. Problem here is liberals don't even know how to advocate for the Democratic Party correctly. Liberals also don't personally understand how politics is supposed to work. Liberals only operate on lesser evil voting. People do not care about lesser evil voting. People do not think critically on many issues, and they especially don't think critically on lesser evil voting. If you consistently advocate on just how not as bad as the Republicans you are going to whittle away all of the people that would readily vote for you. I mean, didn't we do that last election? Yes, we did do that last election. And notice something I have personally stated time and time again is a key principle in why people vote a certain way. Okay. Democrats have completely lost touch with the reality that you are supposed to offer something to people, not just simply engage in a defensive posture. You have to offer them something, and then you have to prove to the people that voted for you that it was a good idea to vote for you. Engaging in pure team sports to say like, no, it's better if it's a D instead of an R that's doing the same exact initiatives, then, you know, it feels like your team won, and then you can own the conservatives is not going to be good enough to actually win elections consistently. The Democratic Party's platform that they advocate for across the board, if we look at it holistically, is still significantly better than the Republican Party's platform. The issue is that the Democratic Party rarely ever follows through on their agenda, consistently loses and says, oh, well, it's because of the structural hurdles that were placed in front of us, a thing that no Republican has ever stopped themselves from advocating for, to a detriment, mind you, because Republican politics and Republican policy are both, I mean, Republican politics is good, but their policies are bad. And the Democratic Party's policies are supposed to be good, but their politics are supposed to be bad. Republicans never say, oh man, like Mitch McConnell never goes, oh dude, we have structural hurdles. That's why we can't allow Obama to appoint a Supreme Court justice. That's not something that stops them. They do their bidding for their most loyal constituencies, sometimes to a detriment to the continuation of the party. The Democratic Party is supposed to say, look, if you vote for us, we are not as bad as the Republican Party. We will scale back on the Republican Party's death and destruction. We will scale back on the deregulation. We will scale back on the environmental impact, the damaging impact on the environment as a consequence of deregulation and many other things. We will defend labor rights. We will defend workers. We will create better economic opportunities, upward social mobility for some of the least wealthy Americans, some of the poorest Americans, all that good stuff. We will protect immigrants. We will protect marginalized people, whether they're trans, black, brown, whatever, and also women's rights. We will protect women's reproductive rights specifically. These are the things broadly that the Democratic Party is advocating for as they position themselves as not the Republican Party. The Republican Party is advocating for the opposite things, right? However, back in the day, the idea was that if you voted for a Democrat, at least they would never champion the Republican Party's position on these issues. Nowadays, the Democratic Party doesn't even do the lip service. They just say, you vote for us, and that's it. And in that time frame, in that process, the things that they can point to get smaller and smaller and smaller as the daylight between the two parties and their policies actually reduce. In 2020, you could say, and the Democratic Party did, all of the brutalization that you're seeing from the police against free press, all the brutalization that you're seeing from the police, Trump's police, against protesters. We will never do that, as you can see clearly with what's going on with the pro-Palestinian demonstrations all around college campuses all around the United States of America. They're beating the shit out of students. They're beating the shit out of teachers. They're beating the shit out of even the press. Another thing that the Biden administration said, we are not going to be like the Trump administration with their child separation policy and their immigrant detentions. America is a nation founded on immigration. We are all descendants of immigrants. We are a wonderful nation. We could take care of all these people. We are going to do our very best to reverse Trump's policies on immigration. The Biden administration, on the other hand, continued Title 42. The Trump administration's only policy in combating COVID was Title 42, saying that the CDC thinks that these migrants might have COVID and therefore they can't come into the country in an effort to protect Americans from COVID while simultaneously denying COVID was real anyway. Brandon administration continued that policy. Brandon administration continued immigrant detention. The Brandon administration, 4 years after it ran a successful campaign, mind you, against the Trump administration, saying that they were going to reverse in the first 100 days all of the Trump administration's immigration policies, turned around and advocated the exact same bill that the Trump administration was trying to pass over and over again, funding the border wall, funding Customs and Border Patrol, and beefing up border security, assuming that the right-wing framing on the issue of immigration was actually not one of, economic, immigration has always been an economic issue. Still, falsehoods are presented in the conversation on the Republican front, and the Democrats are supposed to tackle it from the economic front and be like, no, they're not actually taking your jobs, yada, yada, yada. But they dropped that completely and took on right-wing framing, took on the framing that the Republicans were advancing, saying that, no, immigration is actually a matter of national security. Immigrants are violent. Immigrants are rapists. Immigrants are thieves. And what ended up happening is basically the same exact thing that you see all around the world. You see in Europe especially, right? That people are now more militant against immigrants than ever before. And the reason for that is because the Democratic Party has also given up on arguing on the real boundaries of this issue and arguing for real solutions to this problem. A problem that is born out of right-wing, white nativist, anti-immigrant sentiments. My point is, if you keep capitulating the right-wing framing on issues, you're going to lose that issue completely. Because why the would people believe you now that you've had an attitude shift when there are people that have been on the immigrants or rapists side with clarity, with moral clarity for quite some time? All you've now done is say, no, they're actually right. I'm handing it to the right wing. I'm the one who'll fix it, but the right won't let me fix it by being right wing. It is an idiotic bargain. Is both bad policy and also even worse politics. In my opinion, is completely unconscionable and also furthering the fascist agenda in this country. It is genuinely devastating. It is genuinely scary. And I cannot comprehend how any liberal doesn't see that reality, the writing on the wall. Chris Murphy. Today, I'm reintroducing the bipartisan border security bill. It's not a bipartisan bill. It is a right-wing bill, by the way. It's only bipartisan because it's a right-wing bill that the Democrats are pushing for. It's insane to me that they're doing this again. Basketball analogy. If you're given the option between Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, two players who overlap greatly, everyone's picking MJ. If you're racist, you want the MJ of racism law. Let's say you're like a chess grandmaster, okay? It's like being a chess grandmaster and saying, I want to play against LeBron in a dunk competition. It's like, what are you doing? You're going to get owned. You know what I mean? There's no reason to go do a dunk competition. LeBron is going to destroy you. Play chess. It is very frustrating to see the Democratic Party do this over and over again, and only to have these people defend this silly notion. People do not vote on lesser evil voting boundaries. It is stupid. And the expectation that like you are owed their vote as the Democratic Party is also stupid. The expectation that you are owed their vote and not vice versa is inherently undemocratic. Why the do we have a democracy then? You have to fall in line and offer fealty to the Lord, to one lordship over the other? Okay, well, why do we have a democracy then? No, you're supposed to earn our vote, man. And union support and climate investment and agency regulations and judicial picks and protections for trans people and DACA protections and marijuana policy and student loan forgiveness and overtime regulations, cabinet picks and renewable interest. Exactly. That's why they voted in the first place. If you act out of line, you should be instantly ousted. I don't even personally disagree with Hutch Hutchinson on this issue. On some. A lot of this is just like a laundry list of things that he wishes the Democratic Party was doing, but there are some that the Democratic Party is like genuinely taking the initiative on, right? Union protections being one of them. It's true. You're wrong if you don't think that the NLRB is not doing a good job. The issue here is still the idea that people are supposed to come to these conclusions on their own when the Democratic Party is not showing them that they're doing that. Even if the Joe Biden administration was legitimately making great initiatives on half of the things that he's talking about here, which, you know, half of them are not real. It is wild to me that they are doing such a bad job with their messaging. They have had zero policy papers on their website, on their campaign website. And I don't even know if they've changed that reality. Like a couple months back, they still had no policies on their website. Now, obviously, many people are not going to go there and read that anyway. It's not going to move the needle, but it's good for people like Hutch and all those other people who want to dick ride the Democratic Party into oblivion to have the talking points. And the fact that they are not even offering talking points to their own loyal Fedayeen is insane to me. It shows me that they are not interested in winning. It is crazy, by the way. The latest New York Times Siena poll showed that Biden is doing horrifyingly bad, losing a 12-point lead in Nevada, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia. All these states where he's supposed to be dominating, with the exception of Wisconsin, is crazy. It's just so incredibly cooked. And so many of the Democratic Party loyal demographics are literally just not voting for Biden. Like all of those states that we're looking at, Latino voters, a key constituency. The states that we're looking at where young voters are an important constituency, even though they don't vote in like massive numbers, it's still an important constituency for the winning constituency that the Democratic Party has to create in order to defeat the Republicans. Biden is basically running on Trump is worse aesthetically and worse for democracy.
Biden's ahead by 4 points nationally. 4 points nationally. Not even an article about it.
National political reporter at The Bulwark, Mark Caputo, also calls the Nevada poll, quote, a total outlier. Meanwhile, the director of polling at Harvard's Institute of Politics, John Della Volpe.
They're doing 2016 again. It's the only method that they have. It's the only thing they know how to do. It relies on the understanding that the Democratic Party is entitled to your vote, okay? You have to vote for them. They are entitled to your vote. It is inherently undemocratic, and it is pretty crazy. It's not just public spin. Biden doesn't believe his bad poll numbers, nor do many of his top aides. Bro, this is literally Trump. Trump did these exact same per Dems who has spoken privately with the president and his team. This informs the largely steady as she goes campaign strategy. Some Democrats think the Biden team, by the way, this is Alex Thompson, the national political correspondent at Axios. So I'm not just reading a random Twitter thread for those of you who get hyper focused on the aesthetics. I'm talking about a journalist breaking his own story on Twitter. Democrats think the Biden team is in denial about the polling and sleepwalking into defeat. The Biden team is convinced the country will not re-elect Trump once they face the choice in November. Ultimately, voters will decide which side is right. In public and private, Biden has been telling anyone who will listen that he's gaining ground and is probably up on Donald Trump in their rematch from 2020. While the press doesn't write about it, the momentum is clear in our favor, with the polls moving towards us and away from Trump, Biden told donors during a West Coast close swing last week. Reality check. Some national polls have shown Biden ahead or tied, and in several other polls, the president is within the survey's margins for error. Many aspects of Trump's candidacy, including his legal battles, are unprecedented and add more mystery to the election projections. Biden has been under 40% for 8 months straight. No president has ever won the election after registering under 40% approval in an election year, according to 538's approval. These are unprecedented times because no incumbent president has ever run against a former president that is in legal trouble for the horrifyingly bad, corrupt, awful job that he did in the past 4 years that he was president in. So that's the reason why it's not as black and white as you think it is. It is unprecedented. My point is, you shouldn't have to rely on that if you're the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is doing fairly well across the board, with the exception for Biden. Can you imagine a world in which, like, the Democratic Party wins the Senate and the House, but lose the presidency? Because it would be ridiculous. But, you know, we're kind of staring at a reality like that right now. Unless we get even more Democrats to lose their goddamn seats due to corruption investigations. It is ridiculous. The one thing that unseats some of the worst, most right-wing Democrats in this country is their endless thirst for gold bullions from the Egyptian government or securing side deals with the Azerbaijan government. It's freakish the way we are operating in the Democratic Party. Like, comical. Remember how GE polls were the reason we had the vote for Biden because he had an average of 1% more popular vote lead than Bernie? Now polls don't matter at all. Yes. Insane splits here. In 2024, presidential elections were held today. Who would you vote for if the candidates were Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Wisconsin, 47% Joe Biden, 45% Trump. Pennsylvania, 47% Trump. Arizona, 49% Trump, 42 Biden. Michigan, 49% Trump, 42 Biden. Georgia, 49% Trump, 39 Biden. Nevada, 50% Trump, 38% Biden. It's so crazy to think that 4 years prior, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Biden literally had a 12-point lead in Nevada, no? The New York Times Philadelphia Inquirer Siena College poll, April 28th to May 9th. If this general election for U.S. Senate were held today, which candidate would you be more likely to vote for? Jackie Rosen, 40%. Arizona, 45%. Ruben Gallego. Bob Casey, 46%. Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, 49%. This is precisely what I'm talking about when I say the Democratic Party is doing unimaginably good in comparison to the awful performance demonstrated by the top of the ticket. They're doing this in spite of the top of the ticket, mind you. Think about how crazy that is. How does nobody recognize that this spells doom for how personally unpopular the president is? Is Biden cooking or getting cooked? Biden is losing in every state that was polled, and every single senator in that state is winning. Every single Democratic senator is winning in all of those states, with the exception of one. Biden is losing by massive margins too. New Times Siena poll. Voters picked Trump over Biden in handling the Israel-Gaza-Hamas thicket by a wide margin. As observed below, the number of Biden voters abandoning him from the left is a fly speck. Voters punish treachery. This is not just Israel, it's Abbey Gate. Split A, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. 50%. Donald Trump would be better. You want to know why? Because Donald Trump is at least consistently bad on Israel from our perspective. Joe Biden, on the other hand, with his weird, oh, well, Israel has a right to defend itself and we're going to bear hug them, while simultaneously oh, we have to do the right thing and maybe dial it back a little bit, is losing everyone. The other reason is, of course, because Donald Trump is not the president. People are stupid as they don't think about these issues deeply. They literally go, well, Biden is the one doing genocide. Maybe Trump will be different. I can yell about that every day of the week and how wrong that is, but that's not going to move the needle. What will move the needle, however, is Biden taking a strong stance in the right direction. That's the issue. Instead, he's doing the worst of both worlds. He's flip-flopping on it, and more importantly, showing everyone his major weakness, which is that he's old and demented and falling asleep on the wheel. It's really bad. It's really, really, really bad.
I don't believe the polls.
There you go. As poll shows, approval rating is at 33%. Joe Biden says, I don't believe the polls. So frustrating, dude. Trump would bomb Gaza way harder. Donald Trump is obviously more responsible, I would say, for October 7 than Joe Brandon is. Even though October 7 happened while Joe Brandon was the president, Donald Trump's actions are the major turning point for why October 7 happened. Okay? I've talked about this in detail a million times over. Anyway, let's continue.
Vote by 27 points in Michigan while winning it by 24 points in Wisconsin.
A million monkeys with a million
I think there are a lot of
cell phones
here.
making calls as pollsters. Okay. That's how you do it.
Finally, the New Republic's Greg Sargent expressed dismay at the survey's methodology. This is important, which shows 20% of the likely voters polled either didn't vote in the last two midterms.
Wait a second.
Did not
wait a second.
Vote.
They're likely voters.
But they did not vote.
The 20% of what the New York Times is calling likely voters.
So let me finish.
Didn't vote in the last general election.
Damn, bro, these guys are really going ham on the polls now that it doesn't favor Biden. It almost feels like they didn't really care about polls ever and only cared about it as long as they could make an argument against Bernie Sanders, huh? Polls don't matter now. Why are you looking at polls? Don't look at polls.
Are you feeling something?
Well, I'm feeling that there's
say?
I think sometimes, as a general matter, there's maybe a little bit of an over-reliance on voters telling the truth about things in general. Hate to say it. Reporters find this occasionally that reporters lie. Here's what I'd say about this poll. If I were to ask you this question, Joe.
That's crazy. I mean, this argument can be launched against every single time anyone has ever polled. So just throw every poll away. Polls are not an accurate way to predict what the election outcome will look like. They are an accurate snapshot of how the people feel, or the closest to reality as to how people feel. The idea that like polls don't matter only comes into play when you either have an ideological interest in your candidate winning, and I readily admit that, where I tell you, like, I don't care about how like polling looks like on Medicare for all. I still think it's a good thing, right? Like, we are oftentimes fortunate that polls actually favor Medicare for all, but regardless, like on the Israel stuff, right? On Israel-Palestine, I don't give a what the polls say. They favor my position, but it doesn't matter. Even if it didn't, I would still be advocating for it because I'm not invested in simply one side winning. I am invested in, doing the right things, getting the government to do the right things, to apply pressure. But I'm not a liberal. And that's part of the reason why, because liberals operate on what they assume the center is, right? They constantly endlessly focus group testing to try to dance on the boundaries of what is accepted by the broadest subsect of voters. And that's how you arrive at the ratchet effect that I was describing earlier. But it is pretty funny when you consider how they are reacting to bad polls here. Thank you. Central Committee says, here's how he acted when that poll looked good for Biden in 2019.
They're trying to figure out whether Biden is going to make it to South Carolina if he finishes in fourth in Iowa and New Hampshire. The question is, will Joe Biden ever be given an opportunity to show where his strength lies?
Yeah, well, Joe, that's the big question here. And we know that in a lot of states, there are still voters who are undecided, still a significant number of voters who are undecided. But
it's just interesting. They're not talking about how bad. I mean, they're not talking about how polls are here.
I'll keep going back to a thing that I try to say every time we talk about these things, which is that I'm really interested, and I know you know this, is like, what are the polls telling us directionally about the race?
I understand there's a difference, though, with the New York Times Siena poll, and you know this. It's given disproportionate.
He's trying to do the Biden campaign's line as well, which is that, like, the momentum is favoring Biden, which is still cope. And Joe's like, no, I don't even want you to say that. I just want you to say it's bad. It's a bad poll because the poll sucks and Biden is doing great.
No, it's not. There's one poll that's wildly skewed every time. Okay. And it does shape. If it's a New York Times poll versus a morning.
Yeah, dude, we need the Brandon campaign to actually investigate the New York Times. Maybe they are Hamas. It seems like they're actively doing election interference. Mr. Brandon, sir, now that we know that Morning Joe is viewed by, in a way that is not dissimilar to Donald Trump, viewed by one person and one person only, the most important audience member, that MSNBC's Morning Joe is the exact same equivalent. Fox and Friends had one very important viewer, Donald Trump. Morning Joe has one very important viewer, Joseph Robinette Brandon.
Yes. Joe, you're saying something more than that, though. You're saying the New York Times is systematically putting these polls out in a way to try to amplify them to drive the news cycle.
Yes. I am saying that.
And I'm not.
This dude is actually repeating the Joe Biden communication, which is the momentum is favoring the Brandon campaign. Don't just look at this poll. Look at all the prior polls and look at where Brandon is now. He's gaining momentum. That's a good thing overall. Polls are still reliable. Joe has lost his mind and is like, no, dude, polls are actually communist and Hamas. Like, just agree with him, jackass. He's trying to save your credibility.
Quoting people who said they're switching their vote from Joe Biden who have never voted before. I'm sorry. The New York Times has to know what they're doing.
That's awesome.